He's regarded as one of the top 10 basketball players of all time, maybe even top 5. And the story of his rise from relative obscurity to Boston Celtic legend is one of the most unlikely of all time. The story of Larry Legend is one that Celtic fans have passed down through multiple generations. As a lifelong Celtics fan myself, it's a story that's rooted into my basketball DNA. And in today's special episode of Once Upon a Dribble, I'm passing the story down to my friend Calvan here, a lifelong Jazz fan, of just how Larry Bird became the face of basketball in Boston. And this is Once Upon a Dribble.
We're back at it again. And this time I'm learning from you, Master Sensei, all about one of the great players of all time. Just how important is Larry to basketball in Boston?
You know, Larry's everything. In the annals of NBA history, you know, for the first few decades of the NBA's existence, there was a lot that went into the, you know, before it became the kind of global phenomenon that it is today. And, you know, there were some pretty hairy moments there for a while in the late 70s when there was the ABA-NBA merger. Of course, in the early days, there was a lot of racial issues still cropping up, not only in the country, but that leaked into the NBA as well. And it wasn't until the 1980s under Larry Bird and Magic Johnson playing for two of the most successful and iconic franchises in all of sports that we kind of eventually get to where we are today, where that transitions into Michael Jordan and the Bulls, the Shaq Kobe Lakers, you know, the LeBron era, the Warriors, and, you know, here we are in 2023, and we can trace a lot of that back to when Larry Bird ran the NBA. So yeah, no, super excited to dive into this one.
I'm excited to find out, you know, as a basketball fan, everyone knows the name, you know, Larry Bird. I know as much as any other casual fan, but to actually take a deep dive into his life, I have never actually taken the time to do that. So I'm kicking back. I got my apple ready for school for today's lesson.
Beautiful.
And I'm excited to see what we can find out about Larry today.
Yeah, let's take a deep dive. Let's get right into it. Like you said, I think that any NBA fan has a pretty, you know, solid bedrock idea of who he is and how important he is, as I was just outlining. And I think he's pretty, you know, universally regarded as one of at least the, you know, top 10 greatest basketball players of all time, give or take a few spots on your personal rankings. But let's take a deeper look at his background, his life leading into the NBA, and then some awesome stories throughout his illustrious career, because he's honestly one of a kind, from his personality to his leadership tactics to some of the you know, pretty interesting stories that crop up along the way. There's a lot to hit. So let's take a look at his background first. You know, Bird is known, one of his big nicknames, aside from Larry Legend, is the Hick from French Lick. He's born actually in West Baden Springs, Indiana, which is a little town in the French Lick Township in Indiana, has a population of less than 1,000 people. Super small area. So, you know, he's a small town guy, Midwest, and French Lick isn't much bigger. That's where his family ends up settling down after he's born. Not much bigger. In the most recent census, French Lick is a little town of less than 2,000 people. And he's born to Georgia and Joe Bird. His dad is actually a vet of the Korean War, and he has 5 siblings, 4 brothers and 1 sister. And, you know, in this household, things were pretty tight growing up. His mom worked 2 jobs to support the family. And to be honest, they lived in poverty. And Bird talks about his poor upbringing a lot throughout his career. And it's something that he said frequently motivated him throughout his playing days.
That's impressive. I mean, think about, you know, just the odds of that happening. If it takes, you know, 1 in 100,000, 1 in million to have someone who even has a chance of sniffing the NBA, you know, it's no wonder why most of these guys grow up in the inner city. You know, there's just a bigger population pool to pull from, bigger odds to find that diamond in the rough. We're talking about a town of less than 1,000, town of less than 2,000 for French Lick. I mean, that doesn't happen.
No.
No, I mean, my dad's from small towns. I can tell you that, the center on the high school basketball team in most small towns is 6'2".
Right.
Like, it's just not where you find basketball talent. And Larry defies the odds here, doesn't he?
He does defy the odds, and the odds stack against him even more so throughout his formative years. Aside from growing up in some pretty poor conditions, his parents divorced when he's in high school,
Mm.
and that eventually leads to this event where his dad sadly takes his own life. His dad went through a lot personally. Like I said, he was a veteran of a war, very tough life, and these are two formative events in Larry Bird's life where he's a teenager, and to eventually get to where he becomes this megastar as a form of escapism, Larry Bird really leans into basketball. He goes to Springs Valley High School, where again, basketball is this way to step away from the tribulations of his childhood. These pretty heavy events where he not only has his parents split, but he loses one of those figures. But Bird is a prodigy, to say the least. At Springs Valley High School, he puts up averages of 31, 21, and 4. 31 points, 21 rebounds, and 4 assists in his senior year. And when we're talking high school numbers, Calvin, those are some big numbers. I mean, the high school game
Yeah.
obviously is different than the college and, of course, the pro game. Usually you'll see like your high school star of a pretty solid team average between, I don't know, 15 to 20 points. 31 points and 21 rebounds in high school is pretty incredible stuff.
That really is. I mean, most high schools, I know it's probably different state by state and
Right.
classification, but most high schools have 8-minute quarters. With,
Yeah.
typical clock stop for fouls, free throws, dead balls, etc. But 32 minutes of actual gameplay. And so, I mean, Larry here, he's averaging a point a minute, essentially.
Yeah.
You're not going to lose a lot of games if you have a guy doing that.
No, and they're dominant in high school, and this draws the eye of Indiana University of the Hoosiers, an iconic college institution, especially in the sport of basketball. And at this point, they are led by legendary coach Bob Knight. Calvin, Bob Knight's a pretty eccentric figure. What first comes to mind when you think of Bob Knight?
First thing that comes to mind is a chair flying across the gym and a player stuck in a chokehold.
Yep, there you go.
No, Bob Knight's old school, man.
Right.
And he is old school even for the old school. Half the things he did on a daily basis would get him immediately fired in today's society. But
Right.
back then it was just like, oh, Bob. Oh, you naughty little guy tossing chairs across the floor. That's gonna be a suspension for the first half. I'm telling you.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm telling you what, right now, Bob.
Oh man.
I'm gonna play for him. I'll tell you that. Incredibly emotional man, and incredibly successful coach. One of those guys who you watch in these old sports movies who are just tougher than nails, but somehow they just win. And Bob Knight, I mean, look at his record. Everywhere he went, he was a winner.
Well, yeah, the record speaks for itself. The success is undeniable. But I'll tell you this, you are not alone in saying that you don't think you could tough it out under Bob Knight, because Larry Legend himself didn't feel like he could tough it out under Bob Knight. So he goes to Indiana University campus to try things out. He drops out after less than a month at Indiana. He finds the adjustment between his small town roots of French Lick and this massive college town of Bloomington, Indiana, to be a little too much. And then when you couple that with Bob Knight's coldness and this really, emotional approach, it was too much to him. So he goes back to French Lick. He enrolls at this little institution there known as Northwood in West Baden, which is right there in the French Lick township. And he doesn't even touch basketball for a year. He works these municipal jobs for a little bit. He's actually even a garbage man for a time, just doing these random jobs, just kind of doing his thing. And he enrolls eventually at Indiana State in 1975. And as expected with the Indiana State Sycamores, he's awesome right away. In ISU's iconic baby blue uniforms, he helps them reach the NCAA tourney for the first time in school history with a perfect 33-0 record in 1979. So it's just immediately successful at the collegiate level as well.
And I think we sped over this. Did you just call Bloomington, Indiana, too much to handle, too much of hustle and bustle?
Believe it or not, yeah.
Okay, Bloomington, Indiana population as of today, 2023, is barely 80,000 people. You know, if we go back from the censuses, 1970, 43,000.
Half. Wow.
So I don't know what it was in 75. You can kind of just fill in the gaps you want. This is not a math podcast. Thank goodness for that. But we're talking about someone who really is small town. And, you know, I don't want to distract from the fact that Indiana State goes 33-0 in 1979 in those iconic baby blue uniforms. But it really kind of talks about just this oddity that is Larry Bird's personality. I didn't realize just how small town he was.
Oh yeah, I mean it's not even it's not hyperbolic when people the French Lick the hick from French Lick, small town guy. I mean that's just who he is. I mean, like you said, Bloomington isn't even necessarily a big area, and he's just like, nope, I can't do it. Goes back to what's most comfortable to him, and eventually, like I said, gets back to Indiana State. Immediately makes this massive splash, and he's quickly touted as the best college player in the country, alongside this oversized point guard out of Lansing, Michigan, by the name of Irvin Johnson. You might know him better as Magic Johnson. Equally lauded as this college superstar, and they are on this collision course towards destiny in the championship game, which ends up being the highest ever rated college basketball game to date, where Magic's Spartans square off against Bird's Sycamores. And Michigan State, as you know, comes out on top. And despite this, Bird is named the College Player of the Year in this season. And, you know, as a Sycamore, he puts up preposterous numbers for his career, not just for his senior year where they went 33-0. For his career as a Sycamore, he goes for 30 points, 13 rebounds, and 5 assists. And the Sycamores go for 81-13, their record during his time there. And you know what? Even more incredible, he still gets his bachelor's degree. He even dabbles in a little bit of Indiana State baseball. He appears in one game for the school team, and in typical Larry fashion, pretty much succeeding in everything he does. He goes 1 for 2 with 2 RBIs.
Yeah, you know, that's a good day. I'll take a 500 batting average.
I know, right? Knocking a couple of runs, but you know, incredible stuff. Bird is this superstar, and him and Magic are you know, clearly, you know, the NBA is David Stern is salivating looking at these two guys getting ready to come into the league. And, you know, before we jump into Larry's pro career, one fun fact that I did not know at all, even as a Celtic/Bird lifelong fan, Larry Bird has a younger brother. His name is Eddie. He also goes to Indiana State. And he's not just this no-name who's in the shadow of his older brother, maybe still to a degree, but he's a very, very good player at Indiana State. Typically average in double figures as his time as a Sycamore, was a very good three-point shooter. And despite never playing in the pros, if you hop on College Basketball Reference, most of the Indiana State school records belong to either Larry or Eddie Bird.
So, you know, it's one thing to be a younger brother in an older brother's shadow. This isn't just a shadow. This is the shadow of a freaking redwood.
Right.
And great for Eddie. You know, great for Eddie getting his 15 points a game and breaking a few records at Indiana State University. So, you know, wherever you may be, Taylor Griffin, the brother of Blake Griffin at Oklahoma, you're not the only one. You're not the only one, Taylor.
You're not
Don't
alone.
worry about it.
And you know, this leads us now into Bird's pro career, where it's like he has this immaculate collegiate career. How is he going to top this? Well, believe it or not, he's going to top it. Funny enough, we're actually going to jump back just a year because he's drafted in 1978, sixth overall in the draft by the Boston Celtics, but he doesn't sign right away because he wants to play out his last season. But the issue is Celtic legend, former coach, current executive Red Auerbach says he didn't want to pay Larry Bird more than any active Celtic on the roster. So Bird's agent, his name is Bob Wolf, he tells Red that Larry is going to reject any offer and would just enter the 1979 draft instead. But the issue for Red now and the Celtics is that Boston's right to Larry would expire, and Bird would likely just end up being the top pick in 1979, where guess who has the top pick? It's the Los Angeles Lakers.
Whew.
So if Red Auerbach doesn't concede, Larry Bird simply just re-ups in 1979, where he'd likely go number 1 overall. And even if the Lakers stuck with Magic at number 1, the number 2 pick would have been the Chicago Bulls.
There is so many what ifs going on here. I mean, gotta slow down, get a drink of water.
I mean, can you imagine? This isn't just Larry not being a Celtic. This is Larry Bird possibly ending up in the purple and gold, or on the off chance that the Lakers stick with Magic, ending up in the Chicago red and black. I mean, what do you think about that sort of what if?
That is kind of like asking me what happens if Urban Meyer leaves Ohio State for Michigan.
Right.
Okay, like that is just a affront to my Spurs fan loving mind. And I think this is fascinating. I don't think they can do this anymore, right? If they sit out after being drafted, doesn't the team retain the rights?
That's correct.
I don't know when that changed, but how much easier would it have been for Eli Manning to not play for the San Diego if he could just sit out for a year? John Elway not wanting to play for the Colts.
The Colts, right?
That I know those are NFL comparisons. This is NBA we're talking about, but I'm glad they figured that out, because especially in today's day and age, where all these kids are playing for 6 high schools in 4 years, they can transfer willy nilly from college to college. If they're not one and done, we will be seeing this all the time. And picturing something as just physically sickening as Larry Bird in a Lakers jersey.
Oh man, I can't even, nor do I want to imagine that.
And that makes my knees kind of buckle.
Right. And I mean, I just can't. I mean, if you think Bird had it rough at Bloomington, can you imagine little 21-year-old Larry Bird trying to suddenly go to Los Angeles, the city of stars, the city of Hollywood? No way. I don't know. No. Maybe he was too good. He would have been good no matter what. But picturing little small town Bird having to go to Los Angeles with Jack Nicholson screaming at him from his courtside seats, I don't know how that would have gone for him. But funny enough that you mentioned how this this doesn't happen anymore. This doesn't happen anymore because of this situation. So Larry works out for Boston. Of course, he signs a 5-year deal, becomes the highest paid rookie in sports history. And right after this, the NBA changes their draft eligibility rules that prevents teams from drafting a player before they are ready to be signed. And the rule does end up being named after Larry himself. Because I agree with you. I think this would happen a lot more, where a player is like, all right, I just won't play for you. I'll go back. I'll do another year at college. I'll play overseas. I'll do something else. And then I'll just get drafted again next year. And maybe we'll find a better fit for me.
It's one thing to win NBA championships, win NBA MVPs, make it to the NBA Hall of Fame. But how many guys can say they have an NBA rule named after them? Larry,
that's the ultimate, right? He even has the that's the ultimate right there. MVP, nah. Just change the game based off of how I operate. How about that?
There you go. Well, I'm glad they made it. I'm glad he made it to Boston, and and quite a contract for rookie, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, for the time, the money is undeniable. I mean, highest paid rookie ever, and Boston is equally grateful that it works out because they see immediate success. His first few years in the pro ranks, he transforms the Celtics into a title contender essentially overnight. From 79 to 1980, with no other really significant acquisitions outside of Larry himself, the Celtics improved by 32 wins. And, not crazy to hear that in his rookie year, he's an all-star and Rookie of the Year. He averages 21 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists in his rookie year, making him one of only 5 players in NBA history to average such numbers in their rookie year. He joins Kareem, Oscar, Elgin Baylor, and you know what? Didn't know this name before, but Sidney Wicks also averages 21, 10, and 5 as a rookie. So you have 4 Hall of Famers, and then you have Sidney Wicks, who himself averaged 21, 10, and 5 as he was a rookie for the Portland Trailblazers in 1972. Solid player, but not a Hall of Famer like these other 4. But cool little trivia fact nonetheless.
Somebody cue the Sesame Street music. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things is Sydney.
It's Sidney Wicks. But, obviously an iconic rookie season nonetheless. And year 2, you kind of now start to see the embryo of this Celtic dynasty. It starts to form these recognizable features. You have Kevin McHale, drafted in the 1980. And then you have Robert Parrish being acquired from the Warriors. And now you start to see these distinguishable features of what would very, very soon become the premier team in the Eastern Conference. The Celtics in 1981 pushed through to the conference finals, where they find themselves down 3-1 to the Julius Erving Philadelphia 76ers. And Calvin, what do we frequently say about 3-1 leads here on Once Upon a Dribble?
Not good things. Yeah, no, either you win the series and no one cares because it was a blowout, or you blow the series and everybody talks about it for the next 10 years because you blew a 3-1 lead, man.
You can't let that happen. It's a lose-lose because, you win. It's like, great, you moved on, but no one talks about it because you were supposed to win. You were up 3-1, but if you blow it, then you never hear the end of it. So sorry, Golden State fans, Los Angeles Clippers fans, and anyone else who's recently blown such a lead. It happened to Philadelphia here. This is a series that's pretty iconic. All of the games the majority of the games are within one possession, and Philly blows multiple chances to put Boston away, but they climb all the way back. Bird in the final 3 games of this series averages 27, 13, and 5, and they make the first finals in the Larry Bird era, where they face not Los Angeles, but the lowly Houston Rockets, as the powerhouse Lakers lost earlier in the postseason, leaving 2 teams with a losing record, the Houston Rockets and the Kansas City Kings, in the West Finals. A really rare thing that doesn't happen anymore, primarily because at this time, the first round of the NBA playoffs isn't even a best of 5. It's a best of 3. And the Lakers just lose in the first round.
You don't see that anymore. Now that every single round is a best of 7, as it should be,
right?
Nobody just falls backwards into the NBA Finals or even the Conference Finals. It's not going to happen. I mean, you can argue about most recently the Heat has an 8 seed, but no, they were a lot better than your typical 8 seed.
Right.
It's crazy to think how different the game was before the playoff changes.
And the game does modernize itself quite a bit, specifically the playoff format under David Stern's rule, specifically the 1980s, where once we get to the end of the decade, you start to see a much more modern structure. But the Celtics end up defeating the Rockets in 6 games. It's not exactly a prolific series from Bird as far as the scoring goes, but he averages 15 boards, he averages 7 assists, and Boston paces itself to their first championship with Larry Bird there. And, after a couple seasons of not quite getting back to the final dance, we're going to jump to 1984, where this is now one of the most successful stretches for a single player in NBA history. This is year 5 for both Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, and for all the success that these 2 players have seen individually and for their respective teams, they have still yet to face each other in the NBA Finals. And it's crazy because at this point, Bird is age 27. Like I said, he's about to embark on this incredible stretch of individual basketball where he's going to win 3 straight MVPs. And that doesn't happen very often. Obviously, most recently, Jokic nearly won his 3rd straight MVP this past season. But Calvin, who comes to mind, or what comes to mind when you think of some of the, not even necessarily just 3-year stretches, but just greatest stretches for a superstar in NBA history?
I mean, those a handful of them. You can obviously point to the Kobe, Shaq, Lakers three-peat. But it's difficult to say at any given time who was the best player on that team. Obviously, your mind goes to the Chicago teams of the 90s. It's pretty real certain that, MJ's run of 6 titles is one of the great runs in all of professional sports. But when it comes down to like actual individuals, we don't have any other three-peat MVPs.
Mm.
Like Larry is the one and only, and I don't think that gets talked about enough.
I agree. It's a incredible. I mean, we see a lot of. Even back to back is tough, and I think those who are back to back, like most recently, Jokic has done it, Giannis has done it, Steph did it in 15 and 16, LeBron did it twice, and you can go back and back, but 3 straight. I mean, that is just dominance for 3 straight years, and it's backed up by the postseason play as well, which is what we're going to see here. In 1984, it goes without saying that Boston is the best team out east. He wins that MVP. He averages 24, 10, and 7, tossing a couple of steals for Larry, and he edges out Bernard King of the New York Knickerbockers for MVP. And this is pretty cool when I was looking at the the MVP voting for 1984. A lot of good players had good seasons that year. Calvin's Jazz had someone finish on the MVP ballot. This is before Malone and Stockton's prime. And it's not Adrian Dantley. It's Ricky Green. He got 8 MVP votes. Not first place votes, but MVP, I guess you could say points, and finished 13th on the ballot. I'm not exactly a Ricky Green expert or historian, but I thought that was a pretty cool trivia fact for our local Jazz fan here.
Love it, love it. Ricky Green is actually one of the fastest NBA players of all time. In fact, his actual nickname is literally fastest of them all.
No way, I did not. That's funny.
There wouldn't be a John Stockton if there wasn't a Ricky Green. The offense that John Stockton would eventually thrive in was built originally around Ricky Green. And he had a couple seasons there where he was averaging 7, 8, 9 assists. And
Wow.
that was the architect of the offense that would eventually make John Stockton average 15 assists just a few years later.
That's cool. Our fans here, you come for the Larry Bird content, but you stay for the Ricky Green content here. A little 6 foot, 170-pound guard out of Michigan. So awesome stuff. But of course, it goes to Larry, despite the the efforts of Ricky Green in 1984. But this leads us to the finals, where they make their way after a 2-year absence, Boston that is, and they finally square off against the Lakers in a matchup that's commonly seen as the finals that saved the NBA. And this is the first of 3 finals matchups between the Lakers and the Celtics in this era. And this is a 7-game thriller through and through. The unpredictable 84 finals had everything and more. It had great play from all-time great players. It had costly gaffes, extreme drama, controversy, thrilling finishes, multiple overtimes, clotheslines, strategy, conspiracy theories, racial tension, and more twists and turns than a 1980s nighttime soap opera. All that and more. And this is a rivalry that captured a nation's imagination with its subplots, and it's celebrated and headlined by this Magic Larry duel. And the apparent contrast between the two players and their respective teams, it really seemed like it was scripted for television, and you almost couldn't write a better script because they're polar opposites in almost every way conceivable. Larry is white, Magic is black. Larry was this introvert from a small town, as we've highlighted, playing in commonly perceived blue-collar Boston, while Magic is the personification of the glitz and glamour of Los Angeles and Hollywood. Bird Celtics play gritty, hard-nosed defense-first basketball, whereas Magic ran the Lakers' notorious and famous Showtime offense. And it's highlighted in this, this cool and now very iconic 1980s Converse commercial for its old Weapon line of basketball shoes that was endorsed by these two superstars, and really reflected the dichotomy between these two players. If you go back at commercials on YouTube, I highly recommend it if you haven't watched it. It's awesome. Bird's practicing alone on a rural basketball court. When Magic pulls up in this sleek limo and challenges him to a one-on-one match, and it's a really fun clip I recommend watching. And despite this intensity on court, Magic and Larry end up becoming friends off court. But I wanted to go through this to really set the stage for how important this Lakers Celtics rivalry is for the league and for the nation as a whole.
No, it is, particularly in a time. Well, keep in mind we're just a few years, really just a decade or two removed from the most intense era of the civil rights movement.
Right.
We're still just a couple of decades removed from a time where blacks and whites were segregated in school. And the idea of integration is still new and fresh for a lot of Americans. So to bring these two together, to have these two staples of this game, it really kind of serves as a way to kind of help the country continue to evolve and progress, in my opinion.
100%. I think that's a perfect way to put it, because that's what it does. This era is commonly seen as the Magic and Bird era. And it really goes leagues. It really, helps the league to evolve in this way after this really, tumultuous time for the country as a whole, just a couple decades beforehand. And as for the finals itself, I don't want to go too deep on it, as this isn't the object of the episode. And I actually think this finals 100% deserves its own deep dive episode. For a lot of these reasons that we're talking about. But the important part here is that after 3 games, things looked pretty bleak for Boston. The Lakers had stole home court by winning game 1 on the road, and they trounced Boston in game 3, 137-104, a 33-point victory in favor of the Lakers. And they're 2 wins away from the title, despite the Celtics having home court. And a very angry Larry Bird has one of his iconic moments where he comes out to the press after game 3 and says that his team played like, quote, sissies. We have a lot of great players on this team, but not the right heart. And, after the Celtics had essentially given up, they allowed the Lakers to really literally laugh them off the court. They're converting fast break after fast break in the second half, where in the third quarter, the Lakers go off for 47 points and Larry's fed up. And understandably so. If you go back and watch the highlights, the Lakers are lapping them at this point.
Man, and from the things I do know about Larry, yes, he's this rather, introverted guy from a small town, but he has the heart of a champion. I'm sure, we'll talk about the trash talking here in just a moment, but you do not get on Larry Bird's bad side. And unless you want some bad things to happen, stay off of Larry Bird's bad side.
Stay off of his bad side, or you'll find yourself on the losing side more often than not. And that's what happens. Things looked grim, but after this resilient overtime win in Los Angeles just a few days later in Game 4, it was suddenly a new series, spearheaded by Larry Bird's resilience. And the Celtics end up winning in 7 games. Larry gets his second title. He gets his first finals MVP, averages 27 points and 14 rebounds over the 7 games. And now entering 1985, Larry is on top of the world. His powers are at an all-time high, as is his confidence that will continue for the next few seasons. And like I think Calvin kind of just alluded to this, I think this is a good time as any to talk about some of Larry's greatest confidence / trash talking moments, because again, this is really where things crest heading into 85 and then 1986. Calvin, do you have a particular trash talking story or just iconic Larry story that kind of comes to mind when you think of what he's done?
I always go back to the 3-point shooting contest, man.
Mm-hmm.
Just so much swag. It's the 3-pointer is still relatively a novelty in the game. They introduced this 3-point contest to the All-Star weekend festivities. Larry shows up, looks around at the other competitors, and says, "So, you guys all here to see who's going to get second place?" I can't remember the exact quote.
Basically, yeah, no, you got it.
tells everyone that, yep, you know what's going to happen. I'm Larry Legend. You're not. Good luck taking the silver medal.
I mean, just walks in the locker room and asks, "Yeah, so which of you guys is taking home second place?" Just iconic, and like this is actually the first. This is 1986, and this is the first weekend that the 3-point contest is even in existence. And just with the utmost confidence, he's like, "Yeah, this is mine." So that perfectly describes it. I think of a time, and this is also a year later before we head back to '85. Random regular season game against Portland in 1986, and on a whim, he wants to make this concerted effort to shoot with his left hand. The Celtics beat the Blazers by 1, but he was the kind of guy who would routinely just want to spice things up with challenges for himself to really keep him motivated with this long and arduous regular season, because frequently the Celtics are a team that's winning 60 plus games. You can pencil them in for a finals appearance really throughout this entire decade. So during this long trek of the regular season, he's literally messing with people. In this Portland game, Bird goes for 47 points, 14 rebounds, 11 assists, and he doesn't shoot everything left-handed in this game. I've read that when you go back and actually watch the game, the official tally is he makes 10 left-handed shots, 10 of his 21. But it's still enough for the press to ask him post-game why he shot so much with his offhand. And he says, quote, "I'm saving my right hand for the Lakers," which I think is just, awesome. Shows his respect for the Lakers, but at the same time, I mean, he's literally head and shoulders above everyone else right now.
It's head games for him, man. Like, he knows the Lakers are going to see that. He knows that's going to be printed in the locker room. He wants that. He wants to be the topic of conversation going into these games.
100%. And, again, looking at 1985 quickly, because this is a season that ends with heartbreak for Boston. He arguably has his greatest regular season, wins MVP again, makes a second straight finals with the Lakers. But we have an interesting development along the way. Before the Celtics face the Lakers in the finals, they face the Sixers in the conference finals again. This is their fourth tilt in the decade in the conference finals. Boston wins the first 2 games pretty easily, which causes Larry and some of his teammates to go to a local bar in Quincy Market in Boston. And little did he know that the events that would transpire that night would have major implications for the rest of Boston's season. The Celtics would take care of business against the Sixers in 5 games, but he suddenly started to really struggle the last few games. He went from averaging 28 plus points on great efficiency, nearly 50% from the field, to only 15.5 points per game on 30% shooting. So almost pretty much halving his production on terrible efficiency. And at the time, there were no reports of any sort of injury to Larry, but we find out that Larry got into a bar fight in between games 2 and 3 against the Sixers. And reporters present later in the series of a morning shoot-around claimed that Bird's hand had swollen nearly double the size of his first knuckle. And it's later confirmed even by himself, Larry Legend, where he says that it was a mistake. He took accountability for it. But he has this hand injury where the Celtics make the finals, but then consequently lose to the Lakers in 6 games. A really, odd development that I didn't know a ton about. I had kind of heard that Larry struggled in 1985 and wondered what the reason might have been. And turns out it's this bar fight in Boston.
I just love to imagine a bar fight. This is before the time where everybody has a camera in their pocket.
Oh, yeah.
So, this isn't about getting flack. This is about straight up a Bostonian who wants probably to get a wicked awesome drink with Larry Bird here. And things probably just escalate and escalate and escalate. Mm-hmm. And pretty soon, he is breaking a knuckle on some random Boston guy's jaw.
Can you imagine going home to that and you're just like, wife is like, "Oh man, what happened to you? Why did you get into trouble again?" or whatever that is. And you point to the shiner on your face, that black eye, and Larry Bird knocked me out, man.
You point to the indent of the championship ring right. in your face.
Oh,
I got wicked hit by Larry.
Oh man, good stuff. this like I said, this doesn't work out for Boston. They lose at 85 for a variety of reasons, not just because of this, but it's hard not to think that this is a pretty significant reason as to why Boston doesn't finish it off, because I think that Boston as a team is better in 85 than they were in 84. But this leads us to 86, where they're better than not only everyone in the league, but arguably anyone in league history. If you know your NBA history, then you know that the 1986 Celtics are frequently seen as one of the best teams ever. Up
Yeah,
there
no doubt.
with, the 96 Bulls, the 17 Warriors, the 72 Lakers. Bird, McHale, and Parrish are all at or near the peak of their powers. You got Dennis Johnson, who they acquired a couple seasons before from Phoenix. You got Danny Ainge, who's a high-quality starter out of BYU. And then they make this big steal by trading for Bill Walton, who is this former All-Star with an injury history. Massive risk that Red makes by trading for him, but it pays off. Walton's healthy the entire season as a sixth man, and they go for 67 wins and 15 losses, including 40-1 at the Boston Garden in 1986.
Oh my
That
God.
singular loss coming to Portland. But, Boston is just in another realm in 1986. Tons of trash talking, tons of swagger, and Bird continues to up the stakes to even challenge himself. Calvin outlined the story of the three-point contest, which happens this year. There's the story where he tells Seattle's Xavier McDaniel exactly where he's going to shoot a game-winning shot, and then does it right in X-Man's face, drilling that game winner against the Sonics. The game winners and stories pile up in this really sacred Boston season, where now Celtics fans are putting him in the same breath as guys like Bobby Orr for the Bruins and Ted Williams for the Red Sox. And Celtics fans thought that he could do anything, wins his third straight MVP, and the Celtics cruise to a third championship over the Rockets, where the Lakers actually failed to meet them in the finals that year. And Bird would go back and say, like, hey, we were waiting for you guys, and you guys never showed up for 1986. But iconic year.
Oh, definitely. And can you imagine, Boston, one of the biggest towns in the country for all things, baseball, football, basketball, hockey, to get your name next to Ted Williams as an active player. At this point, he still has a few years in the tank. Shows just how special this hick from French Lick really was, and how special he really is even today in the minds of Boston fans.
Absolutely. And now to kind of to put a bow on everything, I'm going to go over his late career, where injuries unfortunately start to take a toll on him. But despite it all, as in typical Larry fashion, he still is resilient through and through. 1987, the Celtics make the last finals appearance of the Bird era, where they will lose to the Lakers. Like I said, they face each other 3 times. Magic's Lakers end up taking 2 of those 3. But along the way, Larry submits one of his hallmark clutch moments against the Pistons in the conference finals. This is Game 5. The series is knotted at 2 games apiece, and with 5 seconds left in the fourth quarter of this pivotal game, Boston's down by 1 point. Basically, all the Pistons have to do is inbound the ball, make a couple of free throws, and more likely than not, you're going to come away with the game. This is like if you hop onto ESPN Gamecast today on your app and you look at the probability report of your team pulling it out. Right now, the Pistons are sitting above that 90% threshold of closing this game out.
Easily.
But Isaiah Thomas makes one of the biggest gaffes of all time. Bird steals the inbound pass, and as he's falling out of bounds, he initially looks to shoot, but he's kind of behind the backboard at this point on Boston's baseline. Bird turns, he finds a streaking Dennis Johnson, who in his incredibly high basketball IQ, instead of cheering or just watching to see what Larry does next, cuts to the basket in an awesome display of basketball IQ, converts the game-winning layup over Joe Dumars with less than a second left. And this dramatic play catapults Boston back into the finals in a year where, despite Boston still being the 1 seed, this is a year where they're ravaged by injuries. This team is starting to age at this point, and even though they're wily and tenured and experienced, McHale's fighting a foot injury, Parrish is hurt, Ainge is hurt, and they're on Larry's back at this point. And this play is really seen as the magnum opus of Bird's clutch resume. one that includes big games, dramatic game winners. But at the end of the day, it's this defensive play that keeps Boston atop the Eastern Conference.
And doesn't just keep Boston on top of the Eastern Conference, but keeps Larry's biggest detractors in their place. And this is the series with Isaiah Thomas and Dennis Rodman, two outstanding citizens of society. This is where they say Larry's overrated because he is white.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you look at any objective study of the numbers and the accomplishments, and that goes right out the window. And I'm glad Larry had this chance to put it up on the scoreboard.
Absolutely. And they, like I said, face the Lakers one more time. They aren't able to pull it out as the Lakers beat the Celtics in 6 games. At the end of the day, Bird and Johnson captured 8 championships during the 80s, 5 for the Lakers, 3 for the Celtics. And during the 80s, either Boston or LA appeared in every single NBA Finals.
That's remarkable.
I don't know if we'll ever see, at least as far as a team goes, we've seen, maybe really good 3 to 5 year stretches of a team, consistently make the finals, or we've seen a player like LeBron who made several finals in a row. But as far as a team with the same core really running an entire decade, I don't know if or when we'll honestly ever see that again, especially today with the player movement, and really with the league being so deep. I feel like the yearly results are going to get even more volatile from here on out because the league is just full of talent these days. Not that it wasn't back then, but these Boston and LA teams are special.
No, yeah, I mean, even look at the great 90s run of Chicago. In his 6 finals appearances, MJ played against 5 different teams.
Right, exactly.
We're never going to see an era like the 80s with these 2 dominant giants on each coast. It's an amazing era to really look back on.
It is. And, at this point, now moving to the twilight of his career, Bird doesn't retire until 1992, but it's after this point that he really starts to struggle with these infamous back injuries, something that could potentially be traced all the way back to the summer of 85 when he's in the middle of his prime, where in typical Larry fashion, blue-collar guy from a small town hurts his back shoveling crushed rock and gravel to create a driveway at his mom's house. And he's a superstar at this point. You could have hired someone else to do it, or literally anything. But Bird hurts his back, doing some hands-on work for his mom, which I think is you got to do it, man. Especially as I said at the beginning, Larry's mom worked 2 jobs to supply for him and his siblings growing up.
Amazing lady. And I don't know if you know anything about small towns, but you do not go into the county store after hiring someone to do something around the house.
Right.
Like Billy Bob and Old Man Tucker are not going to let you hear the end of it.
You're not going to do it yourself? What are you talking about? Someone else is doing the work for you? Yeah, I get it. But after a really strong 1988 season where, Celtics miss out in the finals, but they're still very good. Larry misses all of 1989 or almost all of 1989, but a few games with bone spurs that he had to have some surgically removed in his heels. And, he grows older. His body is now starting to betray him. And even as he's clearly not the same superstar he was even a few years before, his myth or his mythical status becomes even more incredible. He's hobbled by bad heels. He's crippled by this ravaged back. He can barely make it up and down the court in the early 90s, but he's doing it all on memory, heart, and adrenaline. During his final couple years, he would miss, chunks of the season at a time. He'd even go to the hospital a couple of times in traction. But, then he'd just come right back into the starting lineup like nothing happened, still managed to average his 20 points a night, and just continue to add to his impressive resume. And this part of his career crests in 1991. This is a Game 5 matchup against the Pacers. And I don't know if you've seen the highlights of this, but he bangs his head against the floor where he shatters his jaw, just dives down. And if you look at it, I mean, he smacked the parquet floor pretty hard, leaves the game, and then comes back, evoking memories of Willis Reed for the New York Knicks in the early 70s and carries the Celtics past the Pacers. Even at that point, aren't really going to be vying for the title, but like I said, on pure heart, pure adrenaline, where he still has the Boston faithful chanting his name.
Gotta love it. And I love these kind of stranger than fiction moments. Larry has this great moment against the Pacers. No one knows at this time that he's eventually going to coach the Pacers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It reminds me of when Michael was with the Wizards and he has that 50-point game against the Hornets. Nobody knows at that point that he's eventually going to own the Hornets.
Right.
It's just kind of one of those funny patterns that we see as we look over basketball history.
Absolutely. And, right after this, Bird finally retires from the game. At Bird's retirement ceremony, he and Magic actually have this really touching moment. And another thing that I recommend looking up on YouTube for those listening, where, Larry, Magic shows up to the ceremony because they end up becoming really, really good friends. And underneath, Magic's wearing his Lakers warm up attire, his sweatsuit essentially. Underneath his Laker overshirt, he's wearing a Boston Celtics t-shirt. And him and Larry laugh at that and hug it out. It's a pretty emotional event. I recommend checking out. And Bird doesn't make any comebacks. He didn't embarrass himself. He didn't play on this 500 team getting his stats, or he didn't go to another team just to chase one more title. Larry Bird walked away and he stayed away. And I think that really adds to his mythological status. And then, but Calvin just alluded to this. He comes back in 1997, not as a player, but as a coach for these Indiana Pacers. He said he coached for 3 years, no more than 3 seasons. And despite no previous coaching experience, Larry leads the Pacers to a 58-win season, which was the franchise's best as an NBA team at the time. In the 1998 season, they would push Jordan's Bulls to 7 games in the conference finals. One of the only teams, actually, I think that is the only time the Jordan Bulls went 7 games against a team, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, yeah. No, MJ never had to face that many Game 7s except against the Larry Bird coached Reggie Miller Stone Indiana
Crazy.
Pacers.
Insane. He's named Coach of the Year for his efforts, and then come back and led the Pacers to consecutive division titles in 99 and in 2000. And this all crests in this NBA Finals appearance in 2000. I think it's a pretty forgotten finals series. It's the first of the Shaq Kobe three-peat. And I think it's really easy to gloss over that era of NBA history because of the Lakers' dominance and the way they handled specifically the Sixers and the Nets in their second and third titles. But this finals goes 6 games. It is a lot closer than I think people realize. And, right after that, despite the Pacers very much being one of the best teams in the league, especially the Eastern Conference, Bird resigns from head coaching, and he follows through on that initial promise to coach for 3 years, no more, no less.
Yep. So this is a guy who is the opposite of Brett Favre. He actually does what he says he's going to do.
Right. No coming back. No hints at coming back and maybe doing it and then doing it for 1 year. No, none of that. He's done. He would come back later as the president for basketball operations for Indy, still, even being named executive of the year in 2012. So he's now the only man in NBA history to win MVP, coach of the year, and executive of the year. Which is, he's the only person to do that. I don't know if I even have a word to describe that sort of accomplishment. But now today, 2023, he serves as a consultant for the team in a lesser role as he starts to age and kind of slow down. But Calvin, can you think of anyone active or retired that could maybe pull that sort of thing off? I don't even know if we have, or if we'll see a former player take a head coaching role. I don't know.
It's tough to say. If there was anyone that I could point to, it would be either Steve Nash or Jason Kidd.
Right.
They both kind of had those struggles in their brief times as coaches. No, we're never going to see it.
Yeah, I think that's. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's obviously not technically a record, but that's a feat that I don't know if will ever be replicated. But at the end of the day, I wanted to list off Bird's honors, his accomplishments. He retires as a 3-time champion, 2-time Finals MVP, 3-time MVP, 12-time All-Star, 10-time All-NBA selection, 9 of those for the NBA first team, 3-time All-Defense, all 3 of those for the All-Defense second team. Of course, Rookie of the Year, All-Rookie first team, 3-time three-point contest winner, named one of the 50 greatest players in 1996 at the 50th anniversary, and selected to the 75th anniversary team, of course, in 2021. Coach of the Year, Executive of the Year, 1992 gold medalist, and of course, a collection of college accolades and records as well.
Wow. I mean, as someone who, I know the name Larry Bird, I know his general legacy, but to actually sit down and have you kind of walk me through his life, you cannot tell the story of the game of basketball without talking about Larry Bird. You just can't, can you?
You can't. His name is synonymous now with the Boston Celtics, a team that again is one of the most iconic and successful in league history. When you think of Bird, you think of this era, him and Magic, where I think at another time in the future talk about the effect that those two had on the league and how important it is. And really, I mean, when you see people say that those two saved the NBA and saved basketball, that's not an exaggeration. Those two are now have their names etched in that era of NBA history forever and ever. And you can't talk about one without talking about the other. They are now, intertwined for really all time, which is pretty cool. So this is a blast to do. I appreciate you doing this and tagging along.
No, I'm just feel educated. I feel just absolutely in awe of just how great Larry really was. I'm gonna have to reevaluate my top 10. Maybe move him a bit higher.
There we go.
I think he is top 5. I think you can very much make that argument.
I think he's got a case. And wherever you have him, I think he's undeniably one of the 10 greatest ever, if not a little bit higher than that, in my opinion as well. And this is fun. This is one of the first episodes we've done that's more of a biography of a certain player. We'd love to do more of this. So leave us some feedback. We'd love to hear what players you want to hear more about. Of course, we'd love to hear another player or another important figure in the NBA history from Calvan as well, as I think this is a really fun thing to look back on. And there's a lot of players, a lot of teams I think a lot of even hardcore fans know at least a solid amount about, but there's a lot of details that are lost to history. And you got to pay your dues by going back and recognizing some of these awesome feats, these awesome stories that are, you got to dig a little deeper for them.
You do. And when you start digging a little deeper, you find a lot of hidden treasures. I'll tell you that. So yeah, definitely find us on Twitter, TikTok. Let us know what players or coaches or any members of the NBA basketball family that we should highlight in future episodes. And I can't wait for our next one. Maybe I'll be the teacher next time. You never know. But this has been a great time.
Love it. Thanks for tagging along, guys. And until then, this is Josh and Calvin on Once Upon a Dribble, signing out.